This is part one of our kale grow along to grow the kale over winter. So the first thing we need is suitable varieties to grow kale over winter. Certain ones are more hardy than others. Some will grow over winter in the polytunnel with absolutely no problem, and then some will grow absolutely fine outside. The next thing that we need to consider is whether or not we're going to grow them a little bit earlier and then allow them to get to maturity before the winter, or grow them a little bit later and then either have them as baby leaves or keep them growing very small during the winter, and then come the spring they will start putting on a lot more growth, and then you get some leaves before they start running to seed. So I'm growing these today mainly to be grown in the polytunnel over winter. That extra protection is going to stop any issues with pigeons if you've got that, but also the ongoing weather battling them will cause issues. So if you are growing them outside, then one thing that you will benefit from is having a net to grow them under. And that's not necessarily because there'll be any issues with butterflies. That's one of the great thing about growing brassicas over winter, is that we don't have the issues with the butterflies or the flea beetles and things like that. But what it will do is give you a bit of protection from the wind that's constantly battling these, and allow the plant a chance to really establish itself and get growing, rather than being completely open and out into the elements. When we grow over winter as well, the daylight is playing a huge part of this for us. And when the daylight becomes to the point where it's not really enough to continue these plants' growth, what it does is it goes into a stage of dormancy. So during that period, it will just sit and look like it's not doing anything at all. And then as those light levels improve again, come late January, mid-February, then you'll really start seeing that the plant will start putting on its growth. For me, I need to make sure that these go in after my tomatoes have come out, and then also come out before my tomatoes come back into the polytunnel. So one of the things that we will be doing is continuing to pot these up and have hopefully quite large and established plants before they actually come into the polytunnel to overwinter. And then we'll just be allowing them to run to seed while we're picking the leaves later in the spring as well. One interesting thing with kale is if you do have it growing in a place where you don't need to replace it with other plants, is you can just remove any flower shooting that is happening and allow it to continue growing as a short perennial. A perennial is a plant that grows anywhere from 2 years upwards. So we can continue these plants growing by continuing to move any flower shoots for at least 5 years if you wanted to, or you can just grow them and have them young from seed again. So it's really up to you what you want to do. The other thing I will mention as well is that the flower heads, very much like purple sprouting broccoli, are completely edible. So don't think that once it has gone to seed that you can't enjoy it. And then if it has started flowering before you have the opportunity, then the other bugs and animals absolutely love them. So to let it flower if you can is also a really good thing to do. Brassica seeds are not one of the seeds that you necessarily need to have fresh seeds for, and you should find that ones that are quite old and even past their date on the packet should do fine and should germinate for you. So the varieties that I'm going to grow that are hardy enough to grow over winter in the polytunnel and outside with a net include Sutherland kale, red ruffled kale, dazzling blue, and black Tuscan kale as well. I'm going to be sowing these today into the Charles Dowding 15 cell trays, and then we'll be potting them up and keeping them going until we're ready to put them in once the tomatoes have finished growing. Because I've got a lot of butterflies that are laying eggs on everything, and also because there are tons of flea beetles back at it as well now, I'm going to be taking the tray inside and allowing them to germinate in there, and then they're going to sit under light. So you could also do this in a windowsill, and the amount of light in the windowsill should be sufficient at this time of the year. Just make sure that as you have them grow that you keep moving your hand over them to stimulate the wind in order to allow the stems to get strong as well, because we want these plants to be good and strong. And then later on, as they start getting potted up, they're going to come outside, and I might have to pop a little bit of a net or something over them just to keep them going and not have any issues. If you don't have room for a lot of kale, but you do want to have them maybe to add as baby leaves into salads and things like that, then one thing you could do is plant 2 seeds per cell, or 4 seeds, and then actually thin them down to 2. So I'm going to be planting 2, and then they're going to be thinned to 1. And then we can plant them a lot closer together in a bed, and you'll end up with baby leaves rather than a entire full kale plant. One thing that will happen with this is it will encourage them to run to seed quicker. So you might want to then do another sowing in a month in order to make sure that you've got a succession of leaves. And I have planted these even as late as October before. So to have them as baby leaves, you've really got a little bit more time to play around with that. So don't worry if you haven't got the time to get them in straight away, or if you need to go ahead and purchase the seeds. If we want more mature plants that are going to give us a couple of leaves over winter and then a lot in the spring, then one thing that you will want to do is get them in as soon as you can. These are going to become ready pretty much at the same time. So one thing that you can do with these at the end is to freeze the leaves ready to be used in stir fries and things like that, or you can also blend it up and freeze them in like ice cubes and then add them to smoothies and things. So that's what I do with them usually, and then we'll eat some of the fresh leaves as well. So the first thing we need to do is fill this seed tray with some sieved compost. It is better if it is sieved compost, because we don't want the seeds to get lost amongst any lumps. Just tap it down a little bit. And then we want to make sure that we label these as well. Just gently water these in. I'm just going to make a little bit of an indentation, and I'm not going very deep here at all. And you may have noticed on my soil blocks that I do, I actually sow these straight onto the surface. So that gives you an indication of that really you do not need to go very deep at all. And then I'm going to sow 2 of each of these per cell. And then all I'm going to do is just gently cover those up. And they're going to go in the house in this tray with no lid or anything over them. They should be absolutely fine without a humidity dome. But if you're doing it in a tray and you want to add a humidity dome, then that should be okay as well. And then we'll be looking at repotting these when we start to see some of the roots coming out the bottom. Until then, they should be absolutely fine sitting in this tray.